Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane. It's Monday, the 5th of November, 2018. Remember, the 5th of November. Well, whatever you're doing, stay safe. Well, hope you had a good weekend. And I got to tell you that much of the weekend was spent with some degree of hilarity watching Francis Egan. He of the overactive eyelids and the body language which says, I may not necessarily be telling the whole truth. Well, of course, on Friday morning on the live stream, I made the observation that CUADRILLA were getting desperate. They absolutely needed to get some kind of result because the AJ Lucas stock price was tanking in Australia. And obviously, the British government was starting to, shall I say, go a little bit cool on its relationship. I think Claire Perry is perhaps beginning to realise that she is the sacrificial lamb here, that she is on point to protect Greg Clark's political career. And rather than go gung-ho and basically do whatever the unconventional gas industry asked her to do, she's taking her foot off the gas, no pun intended. And consequently, she has made it clear that right now she's not in a frame of mind to increase the limits in the current traffic light system, i.e. that CUADRILLA have to stop fracking when they reach 0.5 in terms of seismic events. Well, I was predicting that with the connivance of Schlumberger, that CUADRILLA may literally just choose to ignore whatever seismic events occurred on Friday and just go hell for leather, and in the hope that they got some gas. Well, they didn't necessarily do that, but Francis Egan, of course, on Friday evening was bragging that they had got gas flow from the Preston New Road well. And I know a number of people, as soon as that announcement was made, called bullshit, and I think their gut instincts were indeed absolutely correct. But let's have a look at what probably occurred here. Well, we know, because Francis Egan told us in the interview, that the pressurized the well has not been pressurized yet to the point of a full frac. They are treading very, very gently, just trying to establish at what point the geology will fracture, but not necessarily trigger a major seismic event. And he said that they weren't monitoring gas flow because they weren't expecting any gas flow at this stage of the proceedings. Now, if you're not expecting gas flow, that's pretty much indicative of the fact that you're not yet fracking. You are just testing the geology. Well, they then published, of course, this 10-second video or so of something burning in their flare stack. But here's what quite possibly actually occurred. Obviously, when you do frac, you are trying to generate artificial porosity and permeability in the geology, because when you open the well, when you perforate the well in artificial geology, in unconventional geology, then you're not going to get any real flow, and everything is just going to be basically stuck. That's the purpose of fracking, to create the artificial flow. Well, we know that they're not yet pressurizing or fracking to the point where they would create artificial flow. So in other words, the risk is that everything they've pumped down the well to initiate the mini frac just gets stuck there. So how do you get all that fluid back up the well? Well, a common practice is called gas lift, and this is what I suspect actually occurred. So having fracked or mini fracked on Friday, they basically need to get all the fluids out of the well. So Schlumberger dropped the coiled tubing down into the well, and through the coiled tubing, they basically pump gas. And that gas then reaches the bottom of the well, and that gas effectively flows up the annulus between the coiled tubing and the inner side of the casing. And that gas then lifts all the fluids and forces the fluids out of the well. And obviously, when that gas gets to the surface, it will be channeled separately from the solids or from the liquids, and it will go to the flare stack. And that is what I suggest most probably occurred on Friday. I'll put the links under this video to gas lift technology. I mean, this is an established process within the oil industry. Obviously, Schlumberger are not going to say anything. They will keep absolutely mum. And in the event of anything untoward occurring, then, of course, Schlumberger will do what they did after the BP Deepwater Horizon and basically refuse to identify any of the players involved and say, well, we can't actually find them. They've been reassigned. They're overseas. And, of course, this is how Schlumberger gets itself out of the proverbial doo-doo. And after my observations about Schlumberger and the Deepwater Horizon disaster, I had a number of emails and messages over the weekend. And they said, but, didn't Halliburton take responsibility for what occurred on the Deepwater Horizon? Well, they did partially. But basically what happened is everybody took a little bit of responsibility, except Schlumberger, of course, and rightly so, because they were the ones who did advise Donald Woodreen to shut the well in at 7 o'clock in the morning, some 14 hours or so before the well actually blew, because Schlumberger had already identified that the well was kicking. So when Schlumberger evacuated their engineers from the BP Deepwater Horizon, then basically that was the last that Schlumberger really had anything to do with it. But of course they did refuse to participate in the subsequent inquiry. Well, Halliburton, who were responsible for the cementing of the well, who knowingly went ahead with the cement job despite being short of packers, and Transocean, the company that actually owned the rig, they all took a little bit of responsibility. And the reason they did that was to mitigate BP's liability. And consequently, they all said, yeah, we were a little bit responsible. And of course, BP makes sure that they are taken care of by giving them future work. And of course, basically then being able to say, well, we'll pay the reparations, but, it could have been a lot worse. Well, and some of the other questions were asked, well, why didn't Woodreen get charged? Well, he was charged. He and his counterpart, a guy by the name of Bob Kaluza, they were initially charged. They were charged with 11 counts of manslaughter and seaman's manslaughter, because the Transocean rig was effectively a floating rig, therefore a ship and subject to maritime law. Well, despite our efforts to keep the charges live, then ultimately basically Bob Kaluza took a slap on the wrist, and Donald Woodreen took a slightly larger slap on the wrist. Bob Kaluza tragically died last year, in the middle of last year. Woodreen will still have to live with the fact that it was his hubris that led to the deaths of the 11 people on the Deepwater Horizon. And it's very sad that Schlumberger decided that basically their ongoing relationship with BP was far more important than sharing what they knew to have occurred at the subsequent inquiry. So if anything does go wrong, then I guess that the track record says don't expect any of the service companies to come clean anytime soon. In fact, they will do anything they probably can to help mitigate CUADRILLA's liability. So there you go. That's a bit the potted history there. So here, what we have here is a gas canister, and these are about a couple of quid from any camping store, or of course if you are a shareholder of AJ Lucas, or you're in the or of Centrica, then your two companies have invested something like about £100 million so far, and all that has been achieved is Francis Egan blagging that they got about this much gas out of the well, which they didn't, because it most likely came from the two white tanks, gas tanks, that you can see on the photographs of the well site. And these gas tanks most likely hold the gas that is used in the gas lift process. So check out gas lifting, and then you'll have a pretty good idea of how CUADRILLA will probably even again be able to claim that they've had about 10-second flow of gas. Well, they got that 10-second flow of gas because it was pumped down the coil tubing and then was used to bring the fluids that are stuck in the well back to the surface. Well, the seismic activity, of course, continues, and yesterday, shortly before 4:30 in the afternoon, though CUADRILLA weren't actually fracking at the time, as far as I'm aware, then basically they triggered a 0.7 seismic event. This is a trailing event. There's no doubt whatsoever that it's triggered as a result of CUADRILLA's activity in the area since mid-October. So watch this space. Watch this space very closely. It's great that there are so many people at Preston New Road watching every single move. And of course, then there are many people analysing those moves and trying to make sure that CUADRILLA is not able to perpetuate the con that they've had some gas flow out of the Preston New Road well. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the stock price of AJ Lucas, because on the back of Francis Egan's blag on Friday, then the AJ Lucas stock price recovered a little bit, about 17%. Well, when you're dealing with a stock that's trading literally at cents, and it was 26 cents, but it closed today in Australia at 30 cents. But it's really important that the shareholders ask the right questions. And of course, Francis Egan's can say, well, we don't know what gas it was, and we don't know how much it was because we weren't actually expecting it, we weren't monitoring it. How very, very convenient. But what would, of course, be interesting to know is if the gas lift process has actually been used to evacuate the well. So that's a question that I'm sure can be asked of the HSE or the Environment Agency, or those that they seem somewhat reluctant to engage in any discourse with the public, preferring just to keep their heads down. So, interesting times. And meanwhile, something else that's occurring today at the Royal Courts of Justice this afternoon. So if you're in London, you might be interested in heading along to the Royal Courts of Justice, where the Mayor of Malton in North Yorkshire, Paul Andrews, will have the first hearing in his request for a judicial review following the government's announcement of a consultation, basically to fast-track fracking and to make it permitted development. And although it does seem that there's a lot of opposition within the Tory party to this proposition, then nonetheless nothing can be taken for granted, and Paul Andrews will be seeking to get a judicial review and basically arguing the case that there should have been much greater consultation with local authorities and with the respective communities before any such attempt to fast track fracking as planned development, or exploratory drilling anyway as planned development, before that formal consultation was launched. So it'd be interesting to see how that unfolds. But, you know, the one thing that is for sure that although, you know, there is a very strong sense that the industry is literally now in the death throes, because it's pretty evident that the moment that CUADRILLA instruct Schlumberger to fire up the pump trucks to the full pressure, it's going to trigger seismic activity to the degree that basically the whole country is going to say, you know what, I don't think so. We do not want another Groningen, or sorry, let me pronounce that, or try to pronounce that correctly, Groningen. We do not want another Groningen, English pronunciation, experience where thousands of properties are damaged as a result of seismic activity triggered by the oil and gas industry. So, you know, in some ways, of course, maybe they should fire up the pump sooner rather than later. And, you know, let's get this whole sorry mess over and done with. But, you know, Francis Egan has a very healthy salary. And whilst he can just string this out, then he can keep drawing his compensation, which is something in the region of about £500,000 per annum. You know, what price selling your soul, eh? Anyway, that's it from me in this somewhat misty morning here up on the edge of the East Lancashire moors. And I will be back on Wednesday morning at 8:30. But meanwhile, check out what's occurring at Preston Road. Follow it very, very closely. And, you know, obviously the seismic events, which now number, I think it's 34. I think yesterday's seismic event was 34. So 34 out of the last 37 seismic events in the UK triggered since mid-October have been as a direct result of CUADRILLA attempting to extract gas from the Bolan Shale, when in reality they could have got this for a couple of quid. Have a great day, and I'll see you on Wednesday morning.